Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back, and now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact.
Hey everyone, welcome back. So I'm super excited about today's episode because I got to have a conversation with one of my favorite people in the world, my dear friend, Susan Guthrie. We're going to get to that in a second. First, I want to tell you guys that I am finally going to be hosting another retreat. You may or may not recall that my last retreat was in the spring of 2023, I believe. And so we're going to be doing it again, and it is going to be in the spring of 2025. I am super, super excited about this. It's been a long time coming. This is a retreat for women who are going through divorce. It is a divorce recovery retreat. I've named it Unbreakable. Look, we all know that divorce it's exhausting. It's mentally exhausting, emotionally, physically. And it is also so isolating. And we can feel so drained from the endless emotional battles and just all of the grief and the yada, 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 yada. So in this retreat, it's going to be in Sedona, Arizona, which is a healing vortex. You're going to be able to join together with women who understand your journey, and you will have the space to rest, recover, reconnect. It's an amazing time. I will tell you that the women who attended the last retreat are still in touch. It's almost 2 years later. They are still in touch with each other. They have a text thread. A few of them actually went on another retreat together, like a yoga retreat, a completely different kind of retreat together. The women that you will meet on this retreat will become your lifelong friends. And we're going to do a lot of work. We're going to do some deep transformative work that is designed to help you heal, rebuild, and reclaim your life. The retreat center that we are going to is called the Ancient Springs Retreat Center. It is a beautiful, peaceful sanctuary just outside Sedona, and it has natural springs, ponds, sycamore trees, animals. They have their goats and horses, and it's just amazing. And all of our meals there that are included will be included in the price. They are prepared by private chefs using fresh, locally sourced ingredients. These women, chefs Shell and Roxy, will cater to all of your dietary needs. Their love of what they do is going to leave you feeling so nurtured and cared for. I'm not kidding when I tell you that past participants actually cried because of the love and care that Shell and Roxy showed in preparing the food. I swear to God, I would go on this retreat just for the food. But anyway, there's going to be so much more. So we are opening it up very soon. You can go to kateanthony.com/unbreakable. You're going to get emails about this. I just wanted to let you know that this is happening. Go to kateanthony.com/unbreakable. You can read about it and see when it's open for registration, et cetera, et cetera. I love and adore you, and I really hope that you will consider joining us in Sedona. Now, to our episode today, Susan Guthrie, the one, the only. Susan has been one of the leading family law attorneys and mediators in the country for more than 30 years. She is a worldwide expert in online mediation, and she's trained over 20,000 professionals in the ethical and practical considerations in transitioning to a virtual practice. Her award-winning podcast, the Divorce and Beyond podcast, is one of the top 1% of podcasts worldwide, and she is known to millions of listeners around the world as the divorce voice you can trust. Susan is also, as I think I mentioned, my dear friend, and she is somebody that I turn to all the time for whatever it is. But I wanted to have this conversation with her because we've been talking about Family Court Awareness Month and some of the perils of the family court system. And I wanted to bring Susan on to have a different conversation and to talk about some of the benefits and some of the things that the family court system can actually really help with, right? It's not all doom and gloom and fear. And I wanted to highlight the other perspective for you guys. And then, of course, because it's me and Susan, we also get into, in this episode, what actually might happen if no-fault divorce is repealed in states. It is a state-by-state measure, legislation, law right now, and it would have to be repealed state by state. But if that were to happen, what would that look like and how do we deal with it? Without further ado, let me just bring you the conversation with Susan Guthrie. Susan, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
I am always, always, always so happy to be back here with you. Always.
So Susan and I are a little punchy today. Just want to let you guys know. We have a little post-election punchiness happening over here, but we're gonna get through this. There might be more F-bombs than normal, but we're gonna get through this. But Susan, really, we are here to talk about. We've been talking about it's Family Court Awareness Month. I've had the last few episodes have possibly stricken some fear in the hearts of listeners, and so we want to now talk about the other side of that coin and how family court is not always terrible.
Yeah. Now let's add a little nuance to the conversation, right? Because, and I do, let me say at the top, I know obviously Christine Cocciola, Amy Polacco, Tina Swithin, your guests who have spoken about very real issues within our family court system. Absolutely. They've all been on Divorce and Beyond as well. I support all of their work. But I don't want people to get too skewed a vision of what family court looks like for the vast majority of people who have to go there in some fashion to have their divorce finalized, right? We know that divorce is a legal process, and so only a court can undo that legal tie, right? So it's a necessary process. For some, it is a necessary evil, but not for everyone.
Right. And it is important to highlight that like if you end up having to go to court for part of or the total of your divorce, you're not automatically going to be railroaded into. And you were saying before we hit record there, you were saying that probably 75% of cases are not going to run into these issues.
Are probably not even going to end up in the courtroom except for maybe a final hearing. Mm-hmm. I practiced for 30 years. I had probably 75% of my clients who never entered into the courtroom except for their final hearing. And that's because we did all the negotiation and everything that needed to be done. And then we only went to court with our agreement. Mm-hmm. And in fact, an even bigger statistic, I think you and I have even talked about it in other episodes, is more than 95% of divorce cases are resolved with an agreement. Mm-hmm. So that's less than 5%. I think it's more like 3 to 4% that actually ever have a trial, right? That ever have that level of court intervention in their divorce.
And this is also these aren't just low conflict, all amicable, even high conflict cases can still be resolved with an agreement. It might take you longer to get there.
It absolutely is going to take you longer to get there, and the road can be very bumpy. But really, court at all times, for many reasons, is the last choice. So the only reason you end up in court during your divorce, right, while the divorce is pending, is because something needs to be dealt with in a more immediate fashion than finalizing your divorce. The best cases are the ones where you're just going along, coming up with agreements, talking about things, and then when you have it all agreed, you go to court and with a final agreement. But we know that very often issues are going to come up about, what are we going to do about a temporary parenting plan? You're not giving me enough support. I need money. We don't know how we're going to handle the mortgage payments during this interim period of time. You're not giving me the discovery, or I don't think I should have to give you the discovery you're asking for. There can be a lot of questions that can arise that are like these interim matters. And so that's where people might, if they can't negotiate some sort of resolution of that particular issue, they might have to go to court on a motion for and have a hearing to have those things resolved. Mm-hmm. But again, only 3%-ish, 3 to 4, are ever going to have that final trial of all of the issues of their divorce. So for the vast majority, that 25% of my cases that didn't go to court much or at all, the 25% that did go to court, it was usually on a motion. And it was usually something like, I always called it Band-Aid motions, getting enough child support, getting enough alimony, getting enough parenting time, or getting the schedule settled. It wasn't the final issues.
Right. So these are like temporary support orders, temporary custody orders, like just stuff to get you through until you've gotten all of the information that you need, or a motion to compel or discovery or stuff like that.
Listen to you. You sound just like a lawyer.
Yeah, that's I was walking this morning with my next door neighbor, who's a very close friend of mine, and she had just dropped her kids off at school, and I was walking the dog. And so we finished our walk together, and we were talking about how this election might impact our lives. And she runs a nonprofit that supports resettling refugees. And I was like, yeah, but now we're going to be the refugees. Yeah.
I've been Googling Portugal and Costa Rica.
Yeah, so. Right. Exactly. And then I was like, well, if they eliminate no-fault divorce, then like, what am I going to do? And she was like, you're going to go to law school.
Like, great. Yeah.
That sounds great.
On the other side, sadly.
Oh God, no. God help me. I will never do that. I will never abandon you, my loves. Yes. I will never abandon you. But anyway, sidebar. Yes. That was a total side note. For most people, when they enter the family court system, what can they expect?
Yeah, and that's a really, really good question, because the way you phrased it really opens the door to what I want people to understand. You said when people enter the family court system, and that is a nuanced answer. Lawyers love an answer that starts with, well, it depends. Right. That's our favorite phrase. Well, it depends. I think we learned day one of law school. Keep it in mind if you do.
I was gonna put it in my new lawyer notebook.
Exactly. You'll be way ahead of the curve. The professors are going to think you're a genius. It really more depends on the process that you enter into to process your divorce, to go through your divorce. You don't enter into the family court system until divorce papers are filed. Mm. And that is dependent upon the type of divorce that you're going through. If you're going through a traditional divorce where you go hire an attorney and your spouse goes and hires an attorney, pretty traditionally, way back 30 years ago when I started practicing, the first thing to do was serve papers. You've been served. Ba-boom. That paperwork would go back to the court, and that's when you entered the family court system. But if you go through mediation or something like that these days, if you choose an out-of-court resolution system, you may only go to court and file your papers when you're done and never have entered the family court system until the day you get your paperwork finalized. In fact, that's the dream. That's the way it should be for everyone.
Right. So, okay. So most people actually don't ever enter the family court system.
until that last day or until that last final moment. Yes.
Right. And, one of the things I think that's really interesting, having spent, sadly, a lot of time in dependency court in particular, a few stints in family court, it's never what they say, what they show on TV, ever.
Yeah, no. No.
It is so undramatic. Even when they're ruling on things that feel very dramatic to you, it's always, code section, this, but, yep, okay, so we're going to do this. Okay. And, next. Right. And you're like, I'm sorry, what just happened? It's very not dramatic. It's very unemotional.
Well, the people that are there, the people going through the conflicts, through the issues, that's where the emotion lies. Mm-hmm. But those of us, including the attorneys, so when I say those of us who work within the family court system, it's not just your judges and your clerks and your sheriffs and bailiffs and all that. Your attorneys are a part of that system as well. And one thing that we know is none of us are much help to you if we get caught up in all of the emotion that's going on. Right? You have to have the people in the room who are following the process, because the process is the only thing that keeps everything moving along. Now, I say the process, the law, the whatever procedure, all of those things that we have that keep courtrooms orderly and moving, in a certain fashion by the rules. Every court has them, and they have them for a reason. Mm-hmm. Are they perfect? God, no.
Right.
Are they necessary? God, yes. Or it would be utter anarchy in the court system, right? So, as you say that, I love your description of it, because I've had how many clients over the 30 years say to me, that's it?
That's it.
We sat here all day. I read a book because you, Susan, thank God, told me to bring one because I was going to be bored, and I was, right?
Yep.
And at the end, I got 5 minutes to say what I wanted to say, and the judge did what you said they were going to do anyway, right? In the end. Is that it? And I'm like, yep, that's what that was. That's it. Family court. That's it.
Family court. Yes. When you're going in, let's say a client is really going in to fight for their kids, for if there is emotion about, custody or something like that feels like really, really, really important to them. How do you prepare someone to go into that, besides bring a book? It's going to be a long ass day.
Well, before we ever even got to the long ass day in the book, I would have sent them to you to get their emotions under control. No, honestly, because that client who's in there, the one you just described, who's in there for fighting for their children, that is one of the most emotional clients. And for very good reason. Don't think I don't understand, or I'm not sympathetic. I absolutely am. That's why I was someone's attorney going into court with them to fight that.
Yes.
But when you're in a courtroom, and remember what a courtroom is, it's a place where laws are, the facts and the laws come together. And if you guys can't decide, the person in the black robe figures out what they think the facts and the laws say when they're smushed together into one thing. Mm-hmm. And so your emotion is of no service to you in there. Your facts and your law are what are of service to you there. So it is actually hugely important to take that emotion out of there and to be understanding of the fact that only the law and only the facts are applicable here. The key area, and this is where, we get bogged down, law is not black and white. Right. Lawyers wouldn't have jobs if law was black and white. I know everybody thinks, like, you live in California, I practice in California. Everybody thinks, oh, it's community property, it's 50-50, it's so easy. It is the most complicated thing to decide who gets what in California ever. It is so complicated. It is not black and white.
Right.
But there's precedent, there's other laws, there's, judges' rulings on other cases, there's things that we have to follow there. The facts are where we start to get into those gray areas, where we really start to run around. And that's where the emotion will often come in, right? I don't get too many of my clients come in and making legal arguments.
Right.
They're arguing about the facts.
I love that. I love that the facts and the law come together to kind of figure things out. when you said that community property states like it should be really simple, 50-50, like it's a 50%, but yet it's not. Can you expand on that a little bit and say why not? Why is it not simple? If it's 50-50, surely it should be simple.
Well, the easiest example of that is let's take the house, right? The marital residence, because it's the one that comes up most often that explains how this works. Okay. Under California law, if that's marital property, let's just presume it is, right? For whatever reasons, it hasn't been exempted out into separate property for some reason. So it's marital property, your home. Your home's worth, it's California, $1 million.
That's a cheap house.
I know, that's a cheap house in California, but you've got $1 million in equity in the house.
Oh.
Easy breezy. You sell the house, you each get 500,000 less whatever it costs to sell the house, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to sell the house.
No, I don't.
No.
Like my house.
So what just happened to easy breezy?
Well, now I have to give my spouse $500,000.
Do you have to give them $500,000 or do you have to give them $500,000 less what it would have cost to sell the house?
I don't know. I would think just 500,000 because I didn't sell the house.
Right. But if they had it sold, you would have had to sell the house and pay commissions and all that. Yet here you don't have to do that. Is that fair?
Yeah, because I'm keeping it and there's presumably it's gonna increase in value.
Well, there's my dream client who agrees to something reasonable. I'm going to tell you, most people don't go, sure, I'll pay more money for it.
Yeah, right.
Right. So that's one example, but take it a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
Your spouse owned that house before you got married.
Now it's complicated.
Okay. Well, but don't they it was worth 500,000 when you got married and it's worth $1 million now.
During the course of the marriage, it increased in value by $500,000. So shouldn't I get half of the equity of the growth while we were married?
Well, your husband or wife has another property that was separate property, and they used the money that they got for rent on their other separate property to pay the mortgage while you were married. So they paid the mortgage with separate property money from another one of their properties. So did that affect your interest in the property at all? I'll give you the answer. Yes, it does affect your interest in the property.
Yes, I was going to say, I guess so, but I don't really want it to. But
no, we don't
now.
But want has nothing to do with anything how many times has an attorney heard, well, I don't want that? Here's my favorite one. I've heard this one more time. If I had $1, I don't want to pay alimony. Really? Oh my God, Fred, you're the first guy who's ever walked in here without his checkbook out asking when he could write the first alimony check or spousal support, right? Yeah, I've never had anyone say they want to pay alimony, right? So that's an example. And those are not uncommon examples.
Oh, no.
So although on its face, 50-50 sounded easy.
Right. Ultimately, there are things, and then there's, commingled funds, right? There's, but it was my inheritance, but I used my inheritance as the down payment for the house. But first,
or I put a pool in to his house that he owned before we got married, or put a new kitchen in.
Right. But that was my money. That was my inheritance. Okay. Well, you can't cut out the kitchen and take that with you.
But it appreciated the value of the home by $60,000. Well, you only put $30,000 of separate funds in. Do you get the $30,000 or the $60,000 that it increased the value of the home? It can go on like that forever. That's why I'll tell you right now, just side note, I far prefer equitable distribution properties. I practiced in Connecticut for so many years. It's an equitable distribution property. That's not easy either, because that's what's fair and equitable under all the circumstances in the case. God knows what that means, but it's a hell of a lot easier than trying to figure out this tracing, which is what we were just talking about doing. That's the term for it.
Right. I mean, it can become so complicated. So how do you help clients as, as an attorney, when you were practicing as a family law attorney, how would you help your clients come to those decisions, right? Because then it becomes, I imagine, like the way that I talk to my clients is like, what are your, we have to figure out what your deal breakers are. Like, what is your bottom line? What is the thing that you're not willing to give up? Right. And then what are we asking for? And so how do you, as an attorney, that's just my coaching hat, but as an attorney, how do you help people through those? Like, that's just a rat's nest, really.
Yeah. I always called it the come to Jesus, conversations, and you have many of them. I apologize to those who don't come to Jesus, come to Buddha, come to Muhammad, come to whomever. But, let's talk about it from the context of court, right?
Yes.
Because
come to RBG. That's what we're doing.
Come to my RBG.
Yes. For those who nobody's seeing the video of this, but Susan has RBG all over her office.
My shrine to RBG.
Her shrine to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I have my doll that you gave me on my shelf over there. So she overlooks us.
We have our patron saint. But
that's right.
Here's the thing within this to get someone ready for court. And this is what's so hard for people to understand, because let's take all that conversation we were just having about, do you get 60,000 or 30,000 that you put in for the kitchen? Does this value, what's the value today? Do you have to pay this? Do you have to pay that? All of those issues are issues that have to be decided and either by an agreement between the two of you so that you can come to a final agreement on the house. Mm-hmm. And I'm just sticking with the house because that's what we were talking about. Or somebody else has to make the decision for you. And that's where you get the court involvement, right? Because if you two can't decide, that's a perfect example. If you guys can't decide, and so you're stuck on, I should get 500,000 instead of 250 or whatever that is, and your spouse is stuck on, no, you only get 250, that's probably a big enough gap that you're not going to come to an agreement. So the hard discussion with clients is, but it's going to cost you to go to court in a myriad of ways. It's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you time. And God knows it's going to cost you stress. And it's going to get you involved in the court system beyond just showing up for your final hearing. Right. Which is what we were talking about is the what you want. You don't know the outcome. So now is it really that we're talking about 250 or 500? Are we talking about something else now? And that's where clients have the hardest time making the leap. Mm-hmm. And so they opt into the court system often.
Yes.
And we've had this conversation. People think that they're going to go tell their story to the judge. Right. And the judge is going to say, oh my God, thank you for explaining that to me. I'm hearing your facts and your law and they line up for me. You get it all. And we know that that's not usually true, especially folks, if your attorney is saying the facts and the law don't add up to what you're talking about or might not add up to what you're talking about.
Right.
And
because
so that's that hard part.
Right. Because your attorney can guess what a judge might rule, but your attorney can look at the facts and the law and then go, there's kind of a wide berth here. I'm not really sure. Right. Or they can look at it and be like, actually, it's really worth going to court because the facts and the law are really fucking clear on this. And the fact that your spouse's attorney isn't telling them that there's something wrong there. So let's roll the dice.
Which you will almost never hear from an attorney, by the way, because those cases, frankly, don't come down the pike very often. They are gray much more than they are black and white.
That's right.
Only people who see black and white are the people who are going through the divorce. They see black and white because it's how they see it. Mm-hmm. Nobody else in the process usually sees black and white.
Right. And it's important to hear that, right? It's important to listen to your attorney when they say, this is not black and white, and it would be a roll of the dice to go to court.
And a roll of the dice has a lot of consequences. And that's the other aspect. Again, getting back to the family court, awareness. If we're going to talk about awareness, I just want you to realize every trip to court is another trip down a road you don't want to go down. Because other than a final hearing where a judge is basically, in Connecticut where I practiced, even once you had your agreement drafted and done and reviewed by your attorneys and it was all signed, in Connecticut, you had to go to court for the final hearing so that a judge could look at that agreement, decide it was fair and equitable under the circumstances, and satisfy him or herself that you knew what you were agreeing to, right? So that's a good hearing. I loved an uncontested hearing. I could do it in my sleep. I knew exactly the words to say. I knew the end result. It's about the only time you do know the end result in a courtroom. But any other process where you put yourself in front of a judge with your gray facts and law is another step down the dysfunctional family court role. And you put yourself there. Do you always have a choice? No. But much more often than you think, you did have a choice. You just didn't see it or didn't like it or weren't willing to accept it. And that's a little bleak as well, I understand, but I'm being intentionally sort of blunt about this.
No, yeah, absolutely. We have to be.
30 plus years of seeing people do this, I promise you, it's the come to Muhammad or the come to Buddha or the come to RBG moment that I wish all clients could hear.
Did you ever have a case where in like Connecticut where the judge had to actually, you had to go to court for the judge to sign off on it? Yeah. Did you ever have a case that was uncontested where a judge said, I don't think there's something wrong here, or I don't think this is in your best interests, or something like that?
Yeah. I had it once. I knew you were going to ask me that question. And I can tell you right now, the vast majority of attorneys answering that question would say, no, I've never had it happen. Of course, it happened to me. I had a judge literally pick up the agreement and throw it over the bench out onto the floor in the middle of the courtroom.
Oh my God.
But it was because it's a little more explanation, but in Connecticut, before you had to put one of the parties on the stand to be questioned about what had they filed the action, had the marriage broken down irretrievably, is there any possibility of reconciliation? They had to answer all the statutory criteria for a no-fault divorce on the record. And then the judge, we would highlight the terms. Well, as we got through to the end of it, the judge did their usual, well, do you think this agreement is fair and equitable under all the circumstances in your case? And my client decided to say, no, I don't. I'm just agreeing to it because I'm tired and I don't care anymore. So I'm just agreeing to it. And the judge said, if that's why she's signing it, I'm not accepting the agreement. And flu shit went flying through the air. And in the end, she's like, what just happened?
Right? Yeah. And you're like,
you didn't get divorced.
You fucked yourself.
Yeah. I mean, it put us back out in the hallway.
Yeah.
It meant we had to calm down.
Yeah.
It meant I had to talk to her about truly whether she did not think it was fair, because I didn't want her to ever think I was making her sign it or she was forced to sign it. Right. It has to be her choice.
Yes.
And in the end, she said, no, I was just having a bad minute. And we went back in and we did end up finalizing it that day.
Oh, good.
But that's where the emotion came into the room, even in an uncontested case, even in a case we've done that we had negotiated over and over and over every tiny little detail. And frankly, it was a pretty good settlement. It really was.
Yeah.
But her
emotional moment, right? No, I don't think it's fair. I should have gotten the 60,000 for the kitchen, not the 30.
30.
Right.
It only cost me 30, but he's going to get 60 for the kitchen when he sells it.
Right. Like, exactly. Yeah. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. Susan, you brought up a point about no-fault divorce, and I'm curious about your thoughts given where we're at right now. First of all, how likely do you think it is that they're going to actually overturn no-fault divorce?
Well, so let's take that sentence right there, overturn no fault
Okay.
divorce,
Yes.
right? Just let's take that, because I think that what we're getting here is a lot of justified fear, but maybe it's a little higher level than we need under the current, political climate. It is definitely, there needs to be fear. But unlike Roe versus Wade, which was a Supreme Court decision that got overturned.
Yes. Right. Good point.
No fault is actually state by state law.
Right.
And so for it to be repealed or taken away, the right to get a no fault divorce be taken away or taken away as an option, every single state is going to have to legislate that and pass that as a law or put it in their state constitution, which is very unlikely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a remote possibility. I don't even see that. It's really a state by state overturning or withdrawal of that, where no longer is irreconcilable differences an option on the form for you to get your divorce. Right. Now that is something we should be very worried about. Absolutely.
State by state.
State by state, it's already been brought up. It's been brought up in Texas. It's been brought up in Louisiana. Oklahoma floated it. Our incoming vice president has talked about it. Our sitting Speaker of the House has discussed this, and both of them in favor of this. Historically, one of the ways that this type of regime maintains and gains control is through keeping women under control. And what we know about no fault laws is almost 75% of divorces are filed by women. So on its face, no fault may sound like something that affects everyone equally. But in the end, we know that no fault actually disproportionately will affect women and very much the children who are caught in the middle of the divorce. Because when you take away no fault, all you have left is fault. And when you have fault, you have conflict. And what causes negative outcomes for children because of divorce? The level of conflict between their parents. It's going to happen. I would put money on it. If I were in Vegas and I were slapping money down, we are going to start seeing some of our southern conservative states passing these laws or repealing the option. It depends on how their law is set up, right?
Right.
Taking away the right to a no fault divorce.
Right. And so how do you anticipate this? So this means that almost all divorces will probably end up in family court then, right? Because
they will have to.
Because you're going to be contested.
because you have to prove fault, right? And so what people, and I want to just be clear because so many people do not understand. And I know there's some people out there listening right now who are thinking, well, he cheated on me. He is at fault. How hard can this be? Or why shouldn't it be that way? Or I want him to be at fault or her to be at fault. No, you don't. That is not what no fault divorce means. And so I want to be clear about what no fault divorce means. All no fault divorce means is you do not have to prove that your spouse is at fault for the breakdown of the marriage in order to get divorced from them. All right. And there's only certain specific things that you can prove. It can't just be that he's a jerk or you just don't want to be with him anymore. It's got to be adultery. It's got to be habitual intemperance. It's got to be ongoing cruelty. Pardon?
Provable with evidence.
Thank you. Right. Back to law school with Kate, right? It has to be something that you can go into a courtroom and you can prove with your facts and your law in such a way that it's at least dark enough gray that a judge is going to say, yep, they're at fault. Therefore, ma'am, you're allowed to divorce them. Now let's talk about how you're going to divide up all your stuff and co-parent your children.
And, I think it's really interesting to note that the first person to legislate no fault divorce was Ronald Reagan. Because when his first wife divorced him, she had to sort of air their dirty laundry and he was either governor or was about to become governor. She had to air the dirty laundry of their marriage. And he was like, he didn't want that, obviously. So he was the first one to sort of enact no fault divorce. And because he didn't want other people to have to suffer the same fate, but I probably didn't think that it was really going to be, he didn't want men's dirty laundry aired.
Yeah.
And he did go on record and say it was his biggest regret in his political career.
It's probably the one good thing he did in this political career.
Not the AIDS crisis, his response to the AIDS crisis. That wasn't his biggest regret. Iran-Contra, not that. No. It was enacting no fault divorce legislation. But my point about that is that that's where it starts, right? Then it starts with, here's all the dirty laundry. And when, in 1969, when no fault divorce was first legislated, and in the subsequent years when all the other states legislated it as well, the rates of suicide in women plummeted and rates of domestic violence plummeted. So,
and by the way, children's mental health?
And children's mental health went up.
And just overall mental health.
How do you feel like we as professionals might need to prepare for this moment? And anyone who's contemplating divorce. I mean, first of all, if you're contemplating divorce, file now. We don't even know if the filing, if filing gets you grandfathered in, if your state repeals it.
It should. It's very hard to enact laws that are not, that affect things that have already happened. Okay. In fact, that kind of flies in the face of what law is.
Right.
That you can't change things on people without notice. But once you're on notice of the new law, then going forward, the new law can take place. So it would be difficult, I would say, to go backwards and say, oh, I'm sorry, you filed your divorce last year when no fault was allowed, but we're not going to let you do that anymore. I say it's difficult. I'm not going to say it's impossible. Who knows what's coming
given these guys.
Yeah. I mean, right?
Yeah.
But what I want to say is, one, I have seen posts like on Instagram and Facebook and all that saying, run out and file for divorce right now. That's not really a concern at the moment. Mm-hmm. This is not something that they're going to be able to pass a law on overnight.
So he's not going to be able to make an executive order for this.
No, because it's not a federal law.
It's not a federal law. State by state.
Okay. Right? It's state by state. So Trump can't do anything about this. Expect executive orders. They're going to be devastating across our country. Mm-hmm. But it will not be no fault divorce because he doesn't have that power. This is a power that lies with the states, how to govern marriage, right? How to govern that legal relationship within your state. That's why every state has different laws, which is, one of the more frustrating things about family law. So running out in fear is not what I would like to see people doing. In fact, you and I both know the beginning part of your divorce is probably the most important time when you are usually the most emotional.
Yeah.
And when you need to make very clear-headed decisions, get a good coach, talk to them about how this is all going to unroll. So the last thing I want people to do is run out and file in a panic, right? So let's say that at the beginning.
Okay.
But we as professionals and those who are contemplating divorce, you are the queen of the D word, right? You know that people think about getting divorced for a long time. Usually before they actually get divorced.
Right.
If you are in that category out there listening, or someone you love is, or someone you know, keep track of what's going on in that state, in your state or their state. Keep track. Stay educated, because when you do see this push going before that state legislature, be aware of it. Mm-hmm. Be aware of it passes. And when it goes into effect, most laws go into effect January 1 and July 1. Mm-hmm. So just be aware, right? Even if they go and vote it into law, it probably doesn't go into effect for a few months.
Okay. So if it gets voted into law in your state and it's going to go into effect in a couple of months, then you might need to, then you need to get it. Then you're going to need to file. Okay, got it.
And do file And attorneys will be saying this long and loud at that time because you will want to file exactly because of that no fault or because of the grandfather issue.
Right, right, exactly.
Preserve your right. Yep.
Yes. Okay. And so for the rest of us, the professionals out there, how are we going to be able to support our clients through fault? Because, my job has been up until this point, let's make this as amicable as possible. Even if it's high conflict, you are not going to be part of the problem. De-escalate, 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 de-escalate. And now we're looking at a future where my job becomes great. Where's the fault? Where's the evidence? Where are the facts? Where's the law? Right? Like, oh my God.
Where are we going to get the evidence?
Where
How
are
are
we
we
gonna
going to get the evidence?
Right.
It's
Right.
all, I mean, yes, unfortunately, what you do to support clients is going to change rapidly all the way through the entire process. Because when you start divorce as a fault process, you have to jump the first hurdle of fault before you get to any of the other questions.
Right.
Doesn't mean you during the divorce won't still have temporary orders, temporary support orders and stuff. You'll still have those issues because the divorce is going to drag out a lot longer now. And to all of you in California who think your 3 and 4 year divorce was a long time when it was no fault divorce, wait until you see what happens when it's all fault. Because here's the other thing about a fault divorce. One person files alleging a fault or 2 faults on the part of their spouse. Do you know what the other spouse then does?
They then file that it's the other person's fault.
Of course they do. Do you think they're just going to sit there and say, yes, it was all my fault? I'm the horrible person. I did one of these 7 things that under the law are allowed as fault. And therefore, nobody admits those things. And they're going to turn around because they do it now anyway, right? And tell you all the things you did wrong to make them cheat or do this or do that. So now where are you, right? You're in the position of having to prove their fault. Not easy to do. And you have to defend yourself from whatever they say you did.
Right. And it's not like, oh, your fault and I'm at fault. We're both at fault. So a judge goes, okay, you guys are both at fault. So you can get divorced. That's not like
the judge will rule that then the divorce would be allowed to happen if one or both, either of those actions, because it's a suit and a countersuit. So as long as the judge were to rule that someone was at fault or both of them were at fault, that would be grounds for divorce.
Right.
We've got double fault. The only way the divorce wouldn't happen is when the judge determines there is no fault proved.
Right.
Proven in a courtroom.
Proven fault.
It's
right.
not
and
you saying.
So then is there a reason to defend against your fault? Or do you just say, like, I would say, like, yep, you're right. I did all those things. I was terrible in order to be able to be granted the right to divorce. But does that then impact the ruling and the outcome and the settlement?
It might. It depends. But it depends on the state that you're in. And this will change as a part of all the laws they're changing, right? Because now you got to the punishment part. Now you're getting to, okay, someone was at fault. So how is this going to impact them in either the parenting situation and or the financial situation? Right. Well, some states already have that embedded in the law. If the court finds one or the other party to be more at fault in the breakdown of the marriage, Connecticut, the state I practiced in, then as one of the 12 factors a judge could consider in determining how much alimony was paid or received or what the property settlement was going to be, that was one of the factors that the judge could take into consideration, whether one of them was more or less at fault. Other states like California right now, as you know, is a total no fault, where that doesn't play into the community property 50-50. So it will depend on the states, but expect that to change as they change the no fault, because we're also going to a more punitive system of law when you go back to a no fault system or a fault-based system.
Right. And let's make no mistake about it, that no fault divorce benefits women. Fault divorce will benefit men. And let's say, for the sake of argument, 75% of divorces are initiated by women, we might infer that means that men are 75% of the fault. Probably not the case, but do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that we're going to benefit from this. Like, women are not going to benefit from this in any way, shape, or form, because it's harder to prove fault. It's harder to prove domestic violence. It's harder to prove, it's almost impossible to prove emotional abuse with evidence, coercive control. Right. So.
And here's, the other thing to that. If you take away the ability to get divorced because you don't want to be in a relationship with someone anymore, because that relationship is no longer serving you, what is more pathetic for the men out there who are the ones who are advocating for fault-based divorce, right? The Steven Crowder, whatever his name is, the JD Vances. What is more pathetic in this world than keeping some woman in a relationship with you who doesn't want to be with you because she made the mistake of marrying you?
I mean, I say that to my clients all the time when their husbands are like fighting the divorce, and I say, like, why would you want to stay married to someone who doesn't want to be married to you? How pathetic is it that you have to coerce somebody into being married to you? That's really sad.
You just use the word. And Kate, you know why. Know why. It has everything to do with power. It has nothing to do with love.
That's right.
And that is an abusive relationship.
Boom.
So a man who doesn't want to let you go because you want to go and thinks you should stay just because he wants you to stay is the definition of an abusive relationship.
That's
and
right.
A pathetic excuse for a human being.
I love you, Susan Guthrie.
I'm telling you, you can't make this shit up, folks.
Nope. You just have to watch it unfold on the national stage. Susan, this has been a really great and robust conversation. I love and adore you, my dear, dear friend. And I'm so grateful for your wisdom and knowledge and the sharing of all of it that you do.
Well, Kate, it's been the bright spot in my day to come and visit with you. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about in the coming days, months, and years.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time, and until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.